Right, good morning, colleagues. Yes, colleagues, today we gather here to celebrate Human Rights Day. And unlike Hadin, I do know about human rights. To give context to the day, colleagues, I mean, those of us in the past that used to have the color, unfortunate color of being African, black like myself, were required in this country to carry what was then called dome passes. It was later changed to Mcebisi book. On the 21st of March 1960, the Pan-Africanist Congress organized a march in Sharpeville to protest against this kind of legislation. Regrettably, they were shut down and 69 lives were lost. Similarly, in 1985, similar events happened in Mutiny in the Eastern Cape. Lives were lost also there. Legislations and subsequent legislations that denied the African majority of their rights were enacted. So it is against this background, colleagues, that this day today that is commemorated, called Human Rights Day. It is an honor and a privilege, Doc, today, to share this day with you. It's a day where we meet, in an atmosphere where there is an international investor confidence on our fiscal management, is low. Economic growth is also slow. Revenue collection is also lower than expected. We are also experiencing our most severe drought since 1993. We are also importing more than we are exporting. Interest rates are on the rise, thus increasing the cost of living. The rand is depreciating rapidly against the dollar, and currently we are also staring a ratings downgrade in the eye. Unemployment also is on the rise, which is a concern for most South Africans. With regards to us as a Commission, Doc, in the recent past, the World Bank report that was issued in February 2016 seems to suggest that, Doc, as a Commission, we are not doing that very well, very bad, basically, regarding to contributing towards poverty alleviation. And as such, that report suggests that our cartel enforcement function has contributed to the Commission reducing poverty in South Africa by 0.4%. It's not us who wrote the report, Doc, it is the World Bank. Maybe citing what the World Bank report is reporting. That was just by the way of opening remarks. The subject of discussion in question, of course, today is about the impact of competition policy in contributing towards the welfare of South Africans. And I will then start by giving you, both our panelists, an opportunity to present their opening remarks on the question. I'll start with my colleague, Gugu Ndima. Thanks.
Thank you, Zee, and good morning to the audience. And I'm sure you all appreciate the generational mix which has been presented here. It gives me a sense of comfort, in fact, that if I derail, at least there's someone who's more learned who will bring me back into the mainstream. But I believe the topic is quite relevant given the current socio-economic context and geopolitical landscape that you've alluded to. And it raises the question of what becomes a human right when the majority of our people are still lingering in abject poverty? What becomes the value of your ability to vote and live in a constitutional democracy when you are lingering in the periphery of the economy? With respect to competition, especially now that we're in the Competition Commission, we should look at competition within the context of the socio-economic context, as well as what is currently happening, the policies of the country as well. And largely the traits and characteristics that still define the South African economy is that capitalism is still racialized. And one of the best, or person who conceptualized this quite well, was former President Thabo Mbeki, when he spoke of two economies that are parallel to each other. One which serves a certain class, the elite, the dominant players in the economy, the mainstream economy, and those that are at the periphery, who are largely the working class and the poor, who cannot even access the mainstream economy. So before we even speak of competition in this respect, is the field leveled, the playing field with respect to competition? And how many are contributors? And again, from a race perspective, where are black businesses with respect to that? I'll give a simplistic example. One of the best ways to illustrate or demonstrate how racialized the economy is your immediate trolley. If you look at all the items that you buy and the brands, it's still the cartels that have been supported in the past decades. You still see Unilever within your trolley. I'm sure 70% of your grocery money goes to Unilever, Knorr, Robinson, Spice, and so forth. And that is a vivid yet simplistic demonstration of how the economy has not transformed, and the major players, even the distributors, whether it's Pick n Pay, Shoprite, and so forth, are still dominant players. Now recently, I think you would have heard the Premier of Gauteng, Comrade David Makura, Mr. David Makura, who speaks about the township economy. And the catch-22 is that even in the township economy, the dominant owners of means of productions and those that still play in that competition is still the very same dominant cartels, multinational corporations that run the mainstream economy. So before we even speak of competition and the concept of who is actually competitive or how competition policies are assisting, is the field yet leveled? The JSE Security Exchange is a reflection of some of these transgressions. But again, the major contributing factor, as well as the dominance of capital, also within the mainstream politics of our society and the economy. If you read the State of the Nation's address, which was presented by President Jacob Zuma, you get a tacit implying of the fact that the people that are major contributors, in fact influencers of policy, is capital. And we are gradually, in fact, agreeing to the fact that we are, pro-market fundamentalism, which is a serious problem. Capitalism is still racialized, and therefore competition is a serious aspect as well in terms of who are the dominant players within the economy at the present moment. So that would be the opening remark I have on it.
Thank you, Mcebisi. I'm delighted to be here, I must say. I wasn't sure when I first got the invitation to come here to talk about competition policy. I said, what do I know about competition policy? Then the commissioner broke it down, and I thought, oh, okay, is that what you mean? Which really impressed me, to the extent that one needs to understand policy beyond the technicality of policy, beyond the legalistic part of it, but understand it as an embodiment of various contestations and various interests. And that policymakers, especially bureaucrats, need to understand the implication of what they are doing. That this impacts on a whole lot of other issues outside societal issues. And we were just talking earlier with Haji. He was saying there seemed to be a complaint that specialists, with your health inquiry here, that it takes too long for people to become specialists, 2 years, 10 years or so. As a result of which there are very few specialists. And this is a monopoly of sorts, which enable them to charge exorbitant rates. So the idea was that perhaps people should start from the very beginning, specialize in first year and this and that. And I thought that was kind of preposterous idea, because you need to understand disease as a manifestation of society. People who live in certain areas tend to have a certain kind of disease because of their behavior and this and that. So you cannot be a well-rounded doctor perhaps without understanding sociology or anthropology or something like that. And the same applies to policymakers, that this is ultimately a societal issue. Because he was saying to me, here we have economists and lawyers, and at times the problem with lawyers is that they're lawyers. They don't relate what they deal with to broader society. Having said that, my point of departure really would be to understand policy before I go further, and perhaps backtrack a little bit and say, all societies, I'm seeking to challenge the notion of objectivity in what you do. All societies are based on certain values, what we call foundational values. And societies are a creation of their own history and traditions, particular history. This country comes from a very traumatic past, whose anti-apartheid struggle was propelled by the strong belief in equality, the sameness of humanity. And that principle propelled the struggle. It was the foundational value and the motive force, or the motif behind the struggle. To build a different future that would be based on this principle. So the emphasis on equality and decency, and it's not a principle adopted because it is fashionable. It is adopted because those who waged the struggle to build a different future fundamentally believed in the sameness of humanity. So these being foundational values, then the question becomes, well, it's not a question, it follows that a policy, a public policy especially, must be an instrument towards realization of these foundational values. So right there you have a bias towards equality, towards affirming previously disadvantaged, towards creating a humane society, a caring society. Those are the foundational basis of our republic. So when we come then to competition policy, it obviously means that we have to interrogate our notion of fairness. It's not an abstract notion of fairness, but it's a notion that is intended to provide access, to provide a decent livelihood, especially to those who have been previously denied of these opportunities. So there's no shame, therefore, in affirming that as much as one wants policy to be fair to everyone, but there's a particular bias towards opening up access. Because access and equality form the foundational basis of our democratic republic. This then brings me to a study that we did at MISTRA a little while ago, contained in a book called Patronage Politics, Poverty and Equality. This is a study that looked at the interface between patronage politics, poverty and inequality. To what extent are people offered opportunities to eke a livelihood, a decent livelihood? And who controls these resources? On what basis? And what is the role of the state in enabling people to make a livelihood from these resources? Some of them are natural resources. The study was based on 4 case studies. The research was based on 4 case studies drawn in the various provinces. The Eastern Cape, the area village called Mcebisi village, deep sloot here in Johannesburg, Grabo in the Western Cape. Western Cape is an ocean economy, fishing. Deep sloot is an informal sector. And in the Free State, semi-rural, former Pakistan, at Ritz. And we found different instances here, determined by the nature of the economy that there is. At Grabo, for instance, there was a huge complaint about hindrances towards local people accessing fishing, local fishing people. The complaint was that the fishing industry is dominated by established commercial firms. And there's a lot of problems that people have to go through before accessing licenses. And their main argument for these folks, and these are old fishing communities, generations and generations of people have lived on fish. Your dad was a fisherman, grandfather, and all sorts of things. So they were saying, how do you regulate access to something that is a natural endowment? We don't have any other source of livelihood other than the sea. And yet we are told that we need to regulate so as to preserve fish, make sure that that fish doesn't run out. And yet we see all these big ships that come in and out and with lots of fish. On what basis are they given privilege over others? And what do you mean by commerce? Because there's no fairness here. You are excluding whilst affirming others. So how do you determine access? To what extent do certain individuals have rights over others? And what do those who have rights, what do they do to secure these rights? The interaction of money and politics, which has been a very topical issue lately. So when you then have to look at issues of access in that industry, then you'll have to balance that. The environmental issues, of course, fish might run out. But shouldn't priority be on enabling people to eke a livelihood? Should they die? How do you balance that right to living and to a source of income, to a source of livelihood? That was a debate there, and perhaps might be relevant to some of you. Then we came to deep sloot. In deep sloot, there was a huge complaint about the spaza shops being taken over. It's a common complaint, as you know. Some of you come from townships that have been completely redefined. I remember, I come from Port Elizabeth this week. Just down my street, there was an old spaza shop that was owned by a local family there that we knew. And I walked down the street a couple of years ago. I'd been out of the country for a while. And I get here, and, a typical township thing, and I went to buy a cigarette or something. And I spoke closer. I wanted to find out how this family does this. And that was jarring for me because then it was new. But this was obviously a beginning of a phenomenon that has become widespread. And this has to do with the fate, or rather the status quo of township economies. How is it possible that other individuals have managed to make these shops profitable, and the local business people have not managed to do that? Is it because perhaps that they are foreign nationals that are endowed with certain intelligence that local people do not have? Or is it perhaps that they are beneficiaries of certain practices that enable them to thrive when our people have not thrived? Then the question becomes, how does it happen, therefore, that local township economy has pretty much been usurped, has been taken over, at a time when we have a lot of rhetoric about affirming local business. It's an irony, isn't it? So then what is the responsibility? What is government doing? And why was it allowed? Why was this allowed to happen for so long to a point where we only to had a violent eruption for us to realize that this was happening? What do we need to do to realize this vision that we seek to become? There's a little bit of disconnect between what we purport to seek and what we actually do. Things that happen, just happen, they happen. And they happen contrary to what we claim to be. Then you ask, what is the role of the state? What is the role of policymakers? What is your role? What do you say when you see these things happening? That was another point. Then at rates, as part of local development, you have municipalities, for instance, promoting cooperatives. And women have been encouraged to form cooperatives. And the idea is that they would get preferential procurement or tenders and this and that. And to affirm local economy, to affirm women, mainly because, as you know, most households are headed by women that have been abandoned by their men, and yet they claim to be responsible men. So then these women were complaining, these old ladies, that you have big companies here that come in and get these deals that were initially promised to local business people. Or rather to up-and-coming aspirant local business. Then you realize that some of these companies are in fact in cahoots with politicians. Politicians, because a politician cannot be the person in front, so this white person or whoever it might be becomes a front, and you have your 5% or 10% kickback. And all these things are happening within a context where you have a law. You go to the website, there is a law there, it says all these things. Smart English with your legal jargon and everything. But in reality, it does not happen. So the fact that you have a policy does not mean that whatever you seek to happen will happen. Implementation of policy is a function of activism. And policy is not, as I said earlier, it's not neutral. Policy is subjective. You are meant to achieve a particular goal, and in the pursuit of that goal, certain people might be left out. So as we seek, which I hope is what you seek to do, as we seek to open up access to create a just and caring society, it's not enough that we are content with monitoring and sitting in our offices thinking that these policies are finding life and expression out there. It has to be a result of activism. It has to be a result of advocacy and commitment. The Competition Commission cannot sit idly and think that the society it seeks to become would automatically come into being. And perhaps the last point, before I keep quiet, is challenging the notion of progress in the townships. This also has to do with the idea of township economy. We have seen malls coming into the townships, and people have celebrated because it means that you no longer have to take a long trip to town. Young teenage boys means that they can go to a mall close by and perhaps meet interesting people. But what has happened is that these retail shops become dominant. And their dominance, sponsor shops and every little economic activity around, which used to sustain and supply these goods to the locals, they shut down. So the economic life which we had before the arrival of these malls is diminished. And of course, we celebrate this as progress, and we brag that we have the biggest mall and the next township. So these are a couple of things that we perhaps need to probe, to ask questions about. Have we defined our notion of progress in a correct way, a way that enables us to become a just society? Because we have to be alert to the idea of a just society. Just society, not so much because it is a fashionable concept, but a stable society necessarily needs to be just. Inequalities cannot sustain or lead to a stable society. When people are excluded, when they are marginalized, there's a sense of grievance, of resentment that exposes them to radical alternative ideas that might at times even mean demagoguery. And when demagoguery flourishes, the system is vulnerable, because those who embrace demagoguery, it means that they don't have a stake in the system and they are open to any other system. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Doc, and thank you very much, Gugu. At this point in time, colleagues, we will open the floor to questions.